The United Nations World Food Programme has temporarily suspended food aid in some parts of Sudan's state of Gezira as fighting spreads south and east of the country's capital of Khartoum. WFP has put food deliveries on hold in some locations, but teams are working around the clock to provide aid in locations where it is still possible. Around 300,000 people have fled Gezira in a matter of days since clashes erupted last week. For more on the war in Sudan, we speak now to Mathilde Vu, Advocacy Manager of Norwegian Refugee Council. Thank you very much, Mathilde, for your time this afternoon. To your knowledge, what is going on?
At the moment right now, it's the panic. It's a humanitarian catastrophe. It's a displacement crisis like we haven't seen before. There's already 6.7 million people displaced within Sudan. As you mentioned, just in 72 hours, 300,000 people fled the city of Wad Madani to the nearby states, and they don't feel safe. My team was on the ground. I had them on the phone, and they were telling me people are panicked in the street. They're walking with their luggages if they have bags, and they try to jump on the first vehicle that they can find to try and go further away from the war zone. And the big tragedy of this is that nobody knows where to go. Nobody knows where right now is safe in Sudan.
There are two parties in terms of this war. From the word that you got on your team on the ground, what indication did they give them in terms of who is executing these latest attacks?
As you said, like it's two parties, but it's actually more in other parts of Sudan. You have more armed groups, more armed actors that are also involved. The conflict in Sudan is really complex because it's like there is different mini wars, mini and deadly wars inside the country, which makes also all the political talk and the agreements and so on very difficult because not everybody is around the table. Now, in terms of civilian arms, I have to say, like what we've seen over this past 8 months, it's been repeated attacks against civilians, repeated attacks against civilian infrastructures from all parties. There's been really a failure from both parties to the conflict and all of them to actually uphold international humanitarian law. And over this past 8 months, basically, civilian lives have just been expendable, and that's really, really a tragedy.
What should we understand about that when you speak of mini wars? Because as we are made to understand, there are two parties, and you are suggesting that there's many other parties who are then making civilians suffer. What should we understand about the war in Sudan and the nature of the war?
I think what needs to be understood is that it's an incredibly complex war that is becoming more and more challenging, more and more difficult, more and more fragmented by the week, and that there is not enough attention to it, not enough diplomatic attention to it. And so you have the international community basically letting it unravel and destabilize, the entire country, destabilize also the region. And, if you compare the amount of attention on Sudan compared to the violence that is happening, the complexity of the actors, and also the bleak humanitarian future that we're heading towards, it's really shocking how little attention there is and how grave the situation is.
How many people, to your knowledge, have since perished?
That's the heartbreaking part of this question, is that I don't think we know the amplitude of the casualties. At the moment, you have the latest official record is 12,000 people, but it's obviously underestimated. Why? Because 80% of the health facilities across Sudan are not functioning. There's no hospital to record death, In some places of Darfur, for example, people have had to bury their relatives the next day. There's no way to actually register any death. there's a lot of things that are happening also in the dark, in a sense of you have entire regions and right now cities in the country that haven't had any telecommunications for weeks. So the violence that is happening there and the amount of people, being killed is really difficult to actually estimate.
Mathilde, you read reports, you speak to some humanitarian organizations like yourselves on the ground, and the understanding is that this war is also ethnic in nature. Is this something that your team has been able to put or to ascertain? And maybe that question with what is the end goal, right, with all of this fighting and all of these different groups, to what end?
There's definitely an ethnic dimension that is at play. We've seen this in Darfur, and particularly in Al Janina, where my teams are and where my colleagues are. Over this past 8 months, there's been at least 2, if not more, large-scale killing in the city of Al Janina, targeting a specific ethnicity called the Mathilde. In the span of a few days, you had thousands of people being executed. So there's definitely these dimensions that, if you remember from the early 2000s, this really recall, the ghost of the genocide, right? Now, to what extent to what objective, I wouldn't be able to tell you. But I can tell you it's where it's going to lead. It's going to lead to an absolute agony of the country. It's going to lead to more and more displacement. It's going to lead to a total state collapse as well. Like right now, you have a civilian population that is, I hate this expression, but that is on its knees at the moment, and that is, that has no hope, and that is fleeing across the country, and that is really battling to survive every day.
We understand that some aid organizations are pulling out of specific regions, Madani being one of them. Are you also pulling out?
Yeah, that was absolutely heartbreaking. We've had to suspend our operation in Wad Madani. We had 29 staff. And, most of them are actually people who have fled themselves. Most of my colleagues used to live in Khartoum. And when the city basically got destroyed over the first few months of the war, they fled to Wad Madani, and this is where they wanted to start and work to help those people who were exactly like them fleeing. But now, the security of our colleagues, the safety of our colleagues is the most important, and we couldn't ask them to stay. And so, like everybody else, they've left. And like any other civilian right now who you could talk to who are living Wad Madani, it's where should I go? That's a very difficult question to answer, because right now we don't really know where if there is anywhere safe right now in Sudan. The big tragedy of leaving Wad Madani is that Wad Madani was a very densely populated city with huge humanitarian needs. I was there in October, and I could tell you, you had hundreds of families, sometimes in a public building, in a school, for example, families sharing classes, sleeping on the floor, having no access to sanitation. They could barely eat. They were very dependent to humanitarian assistance. The situation was so bad that there was a cholera outbreak just 2 months ago. And so having no humanitarian assistance inside Wad Madani right now, for the ones who are trapped, for the ones who are no means to leave, is terrible.
The Norwegian Refugee Council, when did you get involved in the situation in Sudan, and why?
So we reopened in Sudan in 2020, and I think at that time, if you remember, Sudan was almost the hope of the continent, right? A lot of the international community actually was gathering around Sudan and trying to celebrate, sort of like a new birth of the country. What we realized is that when we arrived in Sudan and, started working, we were looking at things such as development. We wanted to look at helping people who were already displaced to build a durable solution for them. But actually we realized very quickly that the situation was completely unraveling. And, even by the start of 2021, my teams in Darfur, for example, were alerting me on mass attacks against civilians, like displacement camps being burned to the ground, villages being attacked, and so on. And so we could see from 2021 already the premises of a violence that was going to grow. And sadly, it didn't get attention at all from the international community until April 15 this year, when the war was brought to the capital and at a level that was, I think, unimaginable for many of us.
Mathilde Vu is the advocacy manager, at the Norwegian Refugee Council. Thank you very much for your time at this